Hello everyone and welcome. Today I would like to spend a few minutes talking about how it is to be an interpreter post-COVID. So, as all of you recall, in March 2020 we were facing a very serious situation because of the COVID virus that had appeared more or less at the time. So we all know what happened next. Everyone had to be sent home, or most people were sent home. There was a series of lockdowns that completely changed a lot of professions. One of the professions, of course, that was highly affected by it was interpretation. If you people who work as professional interpreters, and I'll try to give you an idea more or less of how it is to be an interpreter right now, because there were a lot of changes because of the work from home paradigm, let's put it that way. So this will be mostly off script. I might start doing this more often, perhaps once a month, just to say a few words about any topic on translation and interpreting. So if this is the sort of thing that you are interested in, so consider clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. Let's start by visualizing how it used to be before March of 2020. So I will mostly talk about conference interpreters. Some of the things I will say may affect as well public service interpreters, but essentially what happened before was interpreters would be contacted by a client or by an agency, whatever that might be, and they would physically go to a certain venue and do their job. That was pretty much it. So I'm oversimplifying, of course. There's a lot of things that interpreters have to do before the event. It's not a question of just showing up and magically start interpreting. There's hours and hours on end of preparation and all that. But again, I'm just oversimplifying this. But the key point is things, to the most part, were done on site. So the interpreter had to be there physically inside a soundproof booth with a partner as well. They would be looking directly at the speakers. They would have a AV team, so all the technical side of things would be done by professionals who know what they are doing. They would set up everything, ensure that the interpreters have access to the best possible sound quality, and also that the output, so the interpreters' own voices would be of the sound would be good, and essentially because you want the audience who are in the room to hear interpretation well. Then came 2020 and the pandemic, and I think we know pretty much what happened. So we could no longer go outside, all sorts of gatherings, travel, everything was limited or even not allowed at all. And this brought a dramatic number of changes to interpretation as a profession. Obviously, many other professions were also affected, but of course we are focusing here on interpretation. Now, because clients could no longer organize events and conferences and any of that, conference interpreters were facing a very complicated situation because all their work was gone, pretty much. For a while, most interpreters didn't have any work because clients couldn't organize anything. They couldn't do anything. Now, eventually, we saw the proliferation of online software such as Zoom and many others. Work from home became a thing, let's put it that way. We had never seen it being applied to this level. It's pretty much affected the entire world, and almost every industry had to adapt. Now, what was the result for conference interpreters? Well, first, the obvious thing, we all had to learn how to use these online tools. Zoom, I believe, is the most widely used, but there are other professional pieces of software that allow for interpretation on online conferences. So first, the clients had to adapt and they had to start organizing virtual conferences. They couldn't use the old method. They couldn't hire a venue and bring all the guests and speakers and have the interpreters there. They had to do everything online. For the interpreter, this meant the following. Instead of going to a place, instead of traveling to a venue physically, we would do everything from our own desks. And as a result, we had to start doing a number of things that we are not used to do before. For instance, we no longer had access to a professional technician who could guarantee that we were getting the best possible sound and also that our own sound was of good quality. So the interpreter started to have a number of extra duties that I mean, they were not there before, or they were delegated to someone else. So now you are not only an interpreter, but you also have to be an AV technician, sort out your own technical problems, and there's a lot of new duties that you didn't have to worry about before, so that's on top of your standard job. We also had to invest a substantial amount of money on new equipment, so we needed headsets, microphones, laptops. We needed all this new gear that would be capable of allowing us to do a good job. We became responsible for ensuring that our computer is capable of processing all these new pieces of software that we suddenly had to start using. And this added some pressure to the interpreter. It made the job more tiring, it made the job more stressful, and on top of that, we no longer had access to a good quality sound from the speakers. Whilst before we used to have a technical AV specialist ensuring that whoever is speaking had a good professional microphone, now people were participating in conferences, in meetings, etc. from their own homes, using not necessarily the best equipment, not knowing how to ensure that the tool they are using, for instance Zoom, ensure that Zoom has the best possible configurations, the best settings. So there was a substantial increase in the amount of difficulties from the technical point, and when the sound of a speaker is of poor quality, it creates an additional strain on the interpreter's brain. So the activity of interpreting simultaneously is already extremely intense. So imagine on top of that, we were dealing with new software we didn't know how to use before. Any technical problems would have to be sorted out by ourselves. We have a number of screens in front of us, and we sometimes cannot see the speaker properly because either they didn't turn on the camera or because the camera or the connection is poor quality. And we are listening constantly to crap sound. There's no other way. Most of the times, or a lot of the times, we had to work with speakers who simply did not have the necessary equipment to speak on a conference. And they don't necessarily make an effort because the reality is 2.5 years after the start of the pandemic, every single day, I still have to deal with speakers who are using poor equipment. They don't necessarily wear a headset. They don't bother to go to a quiet location. All sorts of things that make the interpreter's job so much harder, more stressful, more tiring. And I can safely say, I think most people agree that in general, interpreting from home is more tiring than when you are at the venue inside a good quality, a professional soundproof booth. I also haven't mentioned that communication with your booth partner becomes much more difficult when you are working remotely because you don't have the person next to you. So before you could just do a signal, your partner was right next to you, and it would be easier to do a handover or to communicate with him or her. Now, on top of the software that you are using for interpretation, you also have to have a separate sort of software in which you can keep contact with your booth partner. But to sum up, remote interpretation added a number of layers of complexity to the job, and a lot of interpreters are not happy with that. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but currently, at the time of recording this video, there is an ongoing strike action at the European Parliament. So the interpreters who typically work for the European Parliament, they are organizing a strike to protest against the work from home conditions, because the understanding is that it is deteriorating the health conditions of the interpreters because of all these things that I just explained. So you might be thinking, okay, so work from home just made everything much worse than it used to be. It's terrible. I hope it goes away as soon as possible. But not everything is negative. There are positives as well. Now, you might think that the negatives outweigh the positives. Nothing wrong with that. That's your opinion. If you have made a career following the old methods, the old ways, of course, to most interpreters, this new way of doing things is not ideal. It's worse for our health. It has also, in many cases, reduced the amount of hours that interpreters work, because many conference interpreters have the perception that interpreters should always be paid by the day, not by the hour, or not by half a day, not by 3 hours or 4 hours, as it's happening more often now that we have the remote things going on. But I think ultimately there are good sides as well. That's just what I'm trying to say. Not having to travel is one of them. That was also a stressful part of the job, in my opinion, at least. So yes, we have to deal with more stress in one side, but less stress on the other side. You can make yourself more comfortable. It allows you to be more comfortable, generally speaking. Perhaps not during the event, but before and after, because you work for that number of hours. Once the event is finished, you are finished. That's it. You don't need to go back to the hotel. You don't need to catch a flight. You don't need to do anything else. Only, of course, prepare for the next event that you have. And secondly, a lot of interpreters are focusing on the fact that remote conferences, in many cases, have reduced the amount of hours that the interpreter works, because now they can, instead of having to organize an event for 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, whatever, now they can do a conference online that lasts for 3, 4, 5 hours. So there's a different type of flexibility from the client's perspective now. But also what we need to understand is that because it's not only more simple, but also cheaper to organize an online event, there are events now that are taking place that before, maybe they wouldn't take place. If we see from the client's perspective, before the pandemic, they would have to not only hire the interpreters, they would also have to book a venue, they would pay for a large AV team, they would have to book hotels for all the speakers, all the interpreters as well. Often they would have to pay for their travel as well, for their per diem, so that they can sustain themselves with meals and all that. There was a large amount of expenses that a client would have to face before, and that has been massively reduced. So it's not necessarily that the rates of the interpreters are lower. Maybe in some cases they are lower, but not necessarily. But the reduction in costs comes from the fact that they don't have to have all those extra expenses that are involved in an on-site event. So maybe before, a company would only be able to do 1 or 2 conferences a year, but maybe now they can have more regular conferences and meetings that are smaller, but they are just more often. They can do it more often because now they have the budget to do that. So work from home, remote interpreting is definitely a double-edged sword, and you will agree with it, you will like it, or you will disagree with it, or dislike it, depending on where you come from. I think, generally speaking, new interpreters are more excited about it because it opened several opportunities that they didn't have access to before. The place where they live, the city in which they live, doesn't matter as much, and there's more access to more work. So, of course, many interpreters who were used to the old ways, they don't like it as much. But in the view of some of our colleagues, remote interpreting made things simpler. So I won't try to draw a conclusion. I won't say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. You will have your own opinions, and it's unlikely I will convince you one way or the other if you already have your opinion on the matter. One thing I will say is that some conferences are now that the lockdowns are to the most part over, some clients are again organizing on-site events. But I think that remote interpretation is here to stay, at least to a degree, because you also have to understand the client's point of view. As I was just saying, a large company or the European Parliament, perhaps they have the funding to keep organizing online conferences and have the interpreters on site. Maybe, I don't know. But we have to think about as well the thousands, if not millions, of companies that do not have that financial capacity. A lot of clients will start relying more often on remote interpreting because it just makes more sense to them financially. And I think it's one of those cases in which interpreters will slowly have to adapt to the new reality. So some interpreters will refuse doing work from home, as it's happening right now. Many of our colleagues are trying to stop that at the European Parliament. well-intended as that strike action might be, I am afraid that there's no going back to the old days. As you can see, because there's now a lot of interpreters with experience working from home, because now the software companies, they have developed their software to a level in which the tool is now stable enough, capable enough to provide at least a half decent job, it will be nearly impossible to go back to the old days. As you can see, the European Parliament, when faced with a strike action, this is what they try to do. They try to hire interpreters outside of their pool of interpreters, because it's an option that they have now. And if a large institution like the European Parliament is doing that, just imagine the thousands, millions of companies, what they're going to do, because they have much less funding, generally speaking. So I think it's an option that has become valid. The job can be done remotely. It's not ideal, I think. It's not the perfect scenario, but it can be done if we are willing to make the necessary adjustments. And I mean, to students, new interpreters, all of you, I think it's important that you keep that in mind. So throughout your training, throughout your practice, try to incorporate remote interpretation as well, because even though you will certainly still have access to some on-site work just like the old days, there will still be a lot of opportunities, a lot of market in the remote interpretation side of things. So it's one thing I'm afraid we have to deal with it, and we have to be prepared, and I think it's here to stay to the most part. I know a lot of you will not like to hear this. I get it. I totally understand. I'm not disagreeing with you necessarily. I'm just saying that realistically speaking, I believe this is the way to go from now on. Either way, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know how remote interpretation has worked for you. And if you are a student, if you are still in uni, let me know your thoughts. Are you looking forward to it? Would you rather just do on-site interpreting? Are universities now doing any sort of module, any sort of course on remote interpretation? I'm curious to know what you have to say, so please let me know. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Leave a like below if you liked it. Consider subscribing to the channel. Buy me a coffee as well if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you so much, and until next time.